There's Keith. I'm Mike. Hello. So I'll set the stage of what we're going to talk about today. Both Keith and I have been doing what we do for over 20 years now, and we think about user experience design, formerly information architecture, formerly a lot of things, as we'll talk about. And what we want to do today is really connect some of these thoughts to visual literacy, of course, but to any other kinds of things that you're thinking about. There's so many disciplines in the world and so many different things we do, and you who are in the room do. So we think it's important for this topic because we live in a digital world, and we live in a world in which these tools and screens that we use to give information are everywhere all the time. And so it's important to understand how what we do relates to what you do. And we'll get to the business context too a little bit, but mostly we're talking about humans and life and interacting and sharing information. So also we have a little kind of a handout that's on the tables. That's what we have here. We want you to think about how it fits into your world, and so we've kind of arranged some of our topics we're going to get at in the last half of our presentation, along with some words along the top. And so if you want to draw lines between them, draw a little picture. If you're in the session on thinking visually yesterday, you could draw a black cat if you want, with a white face and hourglass shape and all that, so if you feel like that. And at the end, you might want to share what you've thought, any kind of ideas that come to mind as you make these connections, and we can even take a picture of your sheet and we can share them all if we do that. So whether you do this or not, it's totally up to you, but I think it'll help. This should help keep your thoughts together. So that's our ideas.
So I want to start a little bit with, on the evaluation sheet, it's classified all of us at the conference into one of 4 buckets. So who here is university faculty staff? Okay, give us a sense. 3 of you, okay. Who's K through 12? 1 K through 12, okay. How about museum staff? Okay, lots of museum staff. How about other? Okay, so I'm an other as well, and so that's okay.
Another, yeah.
So, and Mike, I think it's another, but thanks for giving us a sense of where you're from, so we're going to talk about it. So yes, and what is visual literacy? Everybody here should know that already, but I talked to one person that's here, it's like, I'm not sure. So when I was explaining this to some of my user experience colleagues at a conference in Detroit, I pulled together 5 different definitions that I found, and I asked them which was the official definition of visual literacy, right? Perceiving objects, constructing meaning, recognizing ideas, communicating, or this umbrella field, right? And so what's the answer? What's the official definition? Right? It's a trick question, right? Because everything's too dynamic and too changing, and that's okay, right? The same thing if you say, what's the official definition of user experience? Depends who I'm talking to. It depends what time of day it is. It changes all the time because we're in this very fluid world. So I think that's okay. But we'll show some pictures that give you a sense of what we mean when we say user experience, okay? So one is this 3-circle Venn diagram, right, which every profession is obligated to create one and put them in the middle, right? And so often, we talk about user experience as being the intersection between business, design, and technology, okay? So putting those 3 things together and then figuring out how to design for, how to plan those experiences that happen, right? Because technology is constantly changing. We usually have business clients, right, that are trying to make money or save money or do other things. And of course, we draw a lot from the various design disciplines. They can get a lot more complicated, right? So here's 3 circles with overlapping each other, and there's lots more things in here like style guides and simplicity and back-end processes and business analysts and marketing, right? So you can see where some other things fit in. So it can get pretty complex. There's also a lot of different disciplines that contribute to it. So in the upper left, it has things like library science, right? So software testing, branding, ergonomics, right? So more of a hardware background, psychology, technical communication. So Lori, you have a technical communication background, right? So lots of different things have to work together to be a user experience team to create good experiences. Some different skills on the left and so on. So again, we're this sort of crazy mishmash of things that's evolving over time. Another key aspect is the process that we use when we design experiences, and usually we break it down into 3 steps. There's a discover step where you're learning about who your users are, what their goals are, what the business requirements are. Then there's a design phase where we often prototype things before we do the final design. And then there's an evaluation phase, and it's very circular, right? You might do a little bit of discovery, do a little bit of design, do some evaluation, go back to the drawing board, literally. It can get a lot more complicated, so here's an actual visualization that's using a chutes and ladders metaphor to show all the different steps, right? So each square could be a different thing that you could do along your journey to designing experiences. And at some point, you can take a shortcut and you can skip a few things, like maybe you won't do ethnographic research, so that's a ladder jumping up. But later you might do an evaluation with your prototype and you totally fail, right? It just doesn't work. People can't use it. You're falling down the chute and you're starting all over again, right? So there's just one visualization of the process. Right, so for my journey, I started out last year starting to learn about visual literacy. So as I was learning, I was bumping into other things that I was already familiar with, right? So my first journey was into visual design and visual thinking, which we've already talked about here at the conference. Then I went a little bit deeper into user experience design, sort of down the design and thinking path, right? So I dug up, running into design thinking stuff that I had read 20 years ago and sort of revisiting that. But I was revisiting it with my new visual literacy lens on. And then explored more down the literacy path. We talked at the last session about information literacy and media literacy and all these other things. So just for my personal journey, I sort of started out with what is visual literacy? This is new to me. It didn't take long before I was in very familiar ground revisiting stuff that was old hat for me. So once upon a time, let's go back, how far back, Mike? 5 years, 10 years?
Go 10 years, maybe?
Yeah, we're going to go back 10 years. We were debating, we really want to go back to the cave paintings, but that was a little bit too far back. But just 10 years ago in the world that we were designing for, right, computers were in a corner. It was sort of a shrine, right, set up that you went and visited, and you went to the shrine and you prayed and you learned things, and then you went on with your life, right? And there were a few principles back then that we adhered to, right? Things needed to be usable and findable, desirable and useful and accessible, right? So these were core principles that we used in our design processes as we were building things.
There's many others.
And there's many others.
We still use them, and we'll get to that.
Right.
We still use those principles.
But things started changing, right? So the internet's Web 2.0, Web 3.0, whatever that is, Internet of Things, technology is changing actually faster than it was in the past. Mm-hmm. And so as this sort of the technology landscape is changing, then that changes the world that we're designing for. So if we look at an example like the BBC 10 years ago, what their website looked like, right? It had a certain style to it, right? Lots of links that went on to different things. You might have to help me fill in of some of the details here.
Well, take a look at this. We're in an editing mode, right? We're able to move things around.
Right.
Adjust, make your own, using this page, add or remove. That's sort of a Web 2.0 thing, like 5 years ago. This is 1999.
Right.
2009, sorry. I have all these years. 2009, but we had this philosophy of let's let people personalize. And you're actually seeing that in that design. Lots of edit buttons. Well, yeah, certainly, I'm thinking about it. So we've got, again, just 5 years ago, all sorts of links right. and links and links. Right. But presenting information, right? Some of those principles give people things that they're looking for, and in sport, those represent different sports that people are looking for.
And then in the more modern, right? So more up-to-date times for the BBC, right? So some of those ideas of like here, let's put this explicit control where users can customize things. Let's sort of hide that out of the way. They figured out that yes, BBC has a lot of content, so there's hundreds and hundreds of links that they could add on the page, but now they've refined it to just have some of the key ones, right? So just the key ones, like in sports, it's football, Formula One, cricket, rugby, and then lots of others, right? So over time, they've got a better grasp of what their audience is looking for. And
if you see the all sport button there's right. another menu, and you open that up, and now you've got all the other sports.
Right.
So they just said, let's not give everybody everything. Let's try to focus on some things, and let's also not worry about make your own page, do your own stuff. Let's just kind of clean it up. Let's try to get what everybody mostly wants.
Right. So that seemed to be more of a fad that sort of faded away, but there's certain other things that have more staying power.
Yeah.
So Go ahead.
So we're going to skip to today, and so the question is, what are these? And the answer is like the other trick question. It doesn't really matter exactly what they are. They're all computers if you want. They're all our interactive devices if you want. They're all screens. But that's the reality. The reality is all of these things are in use today. All of these things are what are powerful enough to deliver and communicate information, whether it's in learning in school, whether it's in real world experiences, whether it's in a business context. This is what we use, and it's all connected all the time. And so I want to kind of tell you a little bit about that because it's a very mobile world. Even in late last year, mobile use surpassed desktop use, right? So that's interesting, and we know what that means. It means this thing in my pocket is really, it's here, and I can use it for things. But there's important things to think about when you think about mobile. This is one context of mobile. They're in a coffee shop. But this is actually more likely to be what we think of as mobile. This guy's at home laying on the couch, and he's using his computer, which really is a tablet, but that's his computer. He can buy things. He can watch programs at the same time. He can do whatever he's interested in. We take computers and we hook them up to other screens. We take computers and we have partial attention, continuous partial attention, where we're looking at one thing and watching another. But in this case, we're actually watching the same thing. So we might be interacting with a TV show or tweeting at the same time with other people. We have these devices that seem really strange and even newer than the rest of everything else. But the reality is they're really being designed to work together. So an Apple Watch is not some super sophisticated computer. It is, but you're not going to read the news on it as much as it may interact with something else that gives you an alert about news, and then you take the other thing out of your pocket and read that. A good percentage of Americans, adults, maybe 30% more, have a laptop, a smartphone, and a tablet. They have all the devices, so they can do whatever they want. So now we get to what does that mean? And that's where we're going to start to transition to how do we deal with this? What are some of the things that we are doing in our discipline, and how does it relate to visual literacy? How does it relate to communicating? How does it relate to educating? And some of those things. So we're going to help you. Well, let me do this one here. If you read the top, thousands of screens, different devices, 80 different shapes of information that we have to push all of our communication through. We don't get to choose which ones that we support. We have to think about all of them. And just thinking about what people do in their life. This is almost everything you could do in your entire life. It's all digital. From the time you wake up to the time you go to bed, you're doing all of the things and interacting with the devices. Everything has an interface, everything is an experience, and everything is a transaction. And that's where we get to the business. This is, I think, as deep as we'll get into the business sense of it. And that is, everything is a transaction. Whether you're doing something and creating an experience because you want to market a product, or whether you're creating an experience because you want to inform people of whatever it is that's important to you, all these same principles apply, right? So when you think about the experience, there's a give and a get, and obviously a thought of who that user is, and whether it's a very hard sell, or it's a soft sell, or it's a user's, controlled sell, it's all senses of that. And in fact, today I think in our 3.0 trend, I won't even get into what that is, but in the latest trends, we are starting to say that putting the user even more in control of what they want to receive as information is actually the best way to market or the best way to sell. So, gone are the days like where we have to push these things and show these things. People in our business discussions still say, we want to push this, we want to show that, we want this to be visible. But at the same time, if you turn it around and think about the user, you're going to say things like, why do they want that? Why do they want that now? And is there a better place we can achieve your goal, but do it when it's appropriate? Are there other ways? And so we think that way. And what you're going to see as we go through these is that these very modern situations have implications. And so I suppose one takeaway is that this is really complicated. There's a lot of things to balance, a lot of things to consider. Keep in mind, there are some core principles that we set out before. We're always thinking about the user and their needs. We're always trying to make things simple. We're trying not to deliver too much information at one time. But now we have a whole set of new ways that, are there situations, challenges, opportunities, whatever you want to see it. But this is what's going on. And so these are, this is what we're seeing.
Let's pause a little bit, right? And for questions and some discussions. So we've got some more stuff that we want to go to, but we want to sort of regroup here. Any questions so far about what we mean by user experience? Anything that you want to share of about how you've encountered this, perhaps in a museum setting or as an educator, or for the folks that are others.
The role of the interface as being integrally connected. Go.
Yeah, I'm actually a UX.
Yes.
So there's a lot of talk now about losing the interface
Mm-hmm.
or the user experience. Can you bring
Yeah, we'll talk about that when we talk about flat design. We'll talk about storytelling. We'll talk about, I think everything we're going to talk about has to do with how important is the interface to being able to make something usable. And another thing that brings up, I think, is that there is no right or wrong answer to a lot of these because they're complex and they interrelate. And at the same time, there are also, you know, a month later, something else might happen, and some people as a discipline might decide, what can we do with that information, and how can we start to change? And so you'll see subtle shifts over time, but we're talking thousands of people in this country that are practitioners who there's no like rules or laws that we have to go to, but we have principles and theory. And so the theory and principles continue to drive us, and someone comes up with something good, and then we eventually start to adopt. So,
So yeah, so I think
you'll see that.
That's a great question. We have that as one of our topics, right? And again, to relate, like here at the museum, right? So it's somebody's job is to design good signs so that you can find your way from one part of the museum to the next, right? But another way to think about it is how do we design the museum so that we don't need signs, right? Because often, right, when people are using technology, it's the technology that gets in the way. So if we can design that to sort of fade into the background and not make people so aware of it, then they can accomplish their goals better.
So when you plug your Apple Watch into your arm and then it controls your brain and it just causes you to walk,
right? Well,
right?
Well,
just walk
right?
wherever. You don't even need to look at any kind of a map.
And again, right? I mean, you could do some things where, like, if my schedule for this conference was on my phone, right? My phone has a sensor, so it knows where I am. So if I'm within 10 feet of the next room where the next talk is, it could vibrate or something, right? Just as one example, right? So my phone could help me find that. And if everybody has this device, then we may not need as many big signs that say turn left, turn right. So that's just one example of something that we might want to design in the future. So, question?
Well, it's a kind of, it seems like it's a tug of war also with visual literacy. As a designer, it's like you design to make things more, and make it so that the user becomes more literate, but in that you could be inhibiting, back and forth. So it feels like a tug of war between those two things.
Sure, right, yeah, I mean, if your job is to communicate certain information, right, then you need to make that more obvious, right? And so often it's, when we get to like infographics and information literacy, that's going to be about how to get the information perhaps, make sure that the information is there, but that extra stuff that might feel like clutter, how to get that out of the way, right? So it's a different way of like, I don't make signs, right? I make information to communicate things, and it might be a sign, but it might not be a sign, right? There's still some folks like, I just like making signs, so I'm just going to go crazy making signs, right?
Information and information delivery cannot be separated from our sense of things. We have to consider both. So we'll kind of talk through some of these and show you some ideas. And again, you could draw pictures if you
Yeah,
want to
draw some pictures.
So the first topic is, fancy, modular content for multiple contexts. If you're more closer to the space, you might have heard things when people talk about responsive design. And I think context is a good word here, probably the most appropriate, because the reality is that with all those screens you saw earlier, we have to think about context. And so here's just a quick example, Toledo Fire and Rescue Department website that we worked on. And this is an example of what we would call responsive design. And what that means is that the interface is going to adapt to the size of the screen, because we have to deal with that, right? We have to understand there's these screens. So if you take that apart and look at that, what you're really seeing is that the different components of the interface, the different types of content, are being presented in different shapes and different sizes, and decisions are having to be made about, do I include or not include? You'll see there's no red in the fourth one. And then when you look even within something, so if I took the green area, it has a different shape. I might show 4 things, I might show 4 up in a grid, I might only show 2. So what we used to do was we had the big screen. And so we actually only had the big screen. And then a few years ago we said, oh, we have these other size screens, so like let's redo all our stuff. And let's just kind of cram it in, let's like take things away and kind of like jam it in and make it fit. That's kind of, so when I say old approach, that was
5 years ago.
Yeah, 5 years ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago.
2 months ago. Yeah.
A newer philosophy in our thoughts is that you start with the small screen and you choose only what is the most critical information to convey, and then you can move up from there as you start to decide what happens on the larger screens. Thinking of constraints, there's constraints right there. So the idea in this first topic of responsive is really, I think, interesting, and it's very well related to delivering information to people these days. We cannot escape the fact that we have different size screens. And that means that we have to choose what we present. This is not a brochure that you open up. It's not a single screen PowerPoint that I'm going to present to someone. I cannot think about my information without thinking about what is the most important information, what is the least way I can show this. If my image is going to get cropped this way and shown this way and shown that way, like imagine that, contrast that to the other things you do when you're not thinking digitally. I mean, you normally have more control. Here you have very little control.
Right. So what does the technology change that sort of takes away that control? What does that mean for visual literacy? Does that mean visual literacy is really the same across all the devices? Or should we have, should there be different flavors of it that we need in a small device context versus, Madison, a big screen, out on at a large city on the side of a building?
Yeah, and then that gets back to context and understanding where is that information going to be presented, and of course the core of everything we do. Who is it being presented to and why? And then we get into like, what does this thing do for us? So that's a first thought. The next one is user interface metaphors. Here you go. And flat design. And again, there's controversy in every single one of these areas about what is right and what is wrong. Today, we don't want to teach you to be practitioners, right, and be fluent in our space, but we think you can become more literate in the things that we're thinking about and dealing with and draw those connections. So again, it could take a million notes and, it would take, years to really let this all sink in. But I think we've tried to simplify as much as possible. So this thing is called flat design, and you would have heard about it if you heard Apple talking about it, and other people talk about it, and when Steve Jobs, rest his soul, when he passed away, then there was all this discussion. He was the one who made this iPad, books interface look like a shelf. But I can't believe for as much specific, much control as he had over every pixel, I think they have terrible repeat patterns. I never could understand that. But anyway, we call this skeuomorphic. So that's like probably one of the fanciest words we'll use here, and you guys probably use all sorts of other fancy words, but make it resemble the real thing. And then the newer, more modern approach, which people kind of pleasantly called flat. That's not a very exciting name, but clean as possible while still signifying the use. And where you see this now, almost immediately, well, I'll do one more first. It's harder to see with the screen, but if you look at, this is Windows Interface 1985, 1990, 1998, 2001, 2006, 2009. There's a decade where it looked like something, and the latest one looks like just nothing.
Yeah, and again, it matched more, there's little grooves of where, in a physical device, where your thumb would be so that it wouldn't slip, right? You don't really have a thumb, when you're pointing at it with a mouse, so you don't really need those grooves, but it matches in the physical world.
Yeah.
If that were a real slider, then it would have some grooves.
It's not to say that everything that was ever designed in all this period of time was very skeuomorphic and looked like the real thing, but it was kind of a natural sort of state. It was like, if we can make this flat screen look like the things that they're meant to be, then you would do that. Yes?
Question? Yeah.
Was this because designers presumed, based on their experience, that it was required to do skeuomorphic design? Or was it discovered that when they first tried the flat thing, new user...
Go back a slide, go back a slide.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
So...
That's pretty...
Right. So
yes and no to everything, probably. Right, that's my first
I mean,
answer.
one thing that changed was the population of people using the technology, right? So back in 1985, right, this probably, this was tested a whole lot with the people that were using Microsoft Office applications, and this is what worked. I'm pretty sure the folks at Microsoft Research actually tested this, but back in 85 it didn't work, right? And so now, so the people that are using it have changed, right? The technology has changed, so you can actually do more sophisticated graphic design, visual design, and so that changed. And also probably just our tastes have changed. That would be my guess. Those three things have changed.
Yeah, and I mean, so you might say as designers, as pure designers, you can do whatever you want. But as designers of interface, who you're beholden to some business context or some other reason that you have to succeed, you're going to try a little harder to make something that is consumable. So, yeah.
Just by the illustration up there, for example, I was having trouble articulating it. The technology has made us more visually literate, so we know what symbols and things like that mean. All the things that we want pull out from a portrait or any landscape, all those symbols, those are things that we've all been accustomed to.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's reducing the amount of language we have to use.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
And I'll show you three more, or show you in the next build, and explain to you why I personally, and I think, you know, as I'm convincing Keith why this actually matters. So you see it in like new Windows interface, you see it in the new Google Android standards, actually Google overall, as you start to see all their stuff become flatter. The new Yosemite interface on Macintosh. So everybody adopted it really quickly. And here's why I think it matters. Here's what I think is important. All the rest of the stuff I'm going to show you way complicates the whole situation that we're in. And so actually, I think I'm just really happy that flat is happening because it paves the way for us to do the other stuff that we need to do. If we still had to be super skeuomorphic, still make things look like things, I don't think any of this other stuff could really happen and we would be restricted. So whether the whole industry understood that or not, I don't know. I think that UX practitioners have had these debates and they're like, oh, we need to do this or that, but I don't think any of them brings up the topic that says, in the broader sense of things, it's good that we can do this because we have all these other problems.
Question? Yeah, comment?
Sure, I appreciate the flatness
Mm-hmm.
and the simplicity of the design, but it's been a few years and everything became generic, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's another problem because you get over-releasing.
Right.
So if you keep it simple, but what about, do you guys know any trends
Mm-hmm.
to use textures? Not to go back to reality, but to...
Trend, right here. So the question was like, okay, now we're flat and we lose some sense of things. We actually create problems too because there's still people who don't know, I don't know if that's a button, I don't know what to do. So yes, and then, well, what can we do now that we have things that are flat, right? That's what I would say, or just now. And that has to do with layers and motion. And so the other discussion that's happening is that when you saw this screen earlier, the way that we're starting to think about that, and this is really new. I mean, this is kind of a new mindset for all of us to kind of learn our new way, learn our new thinking, adapt it. But we're taking something apart, and it's kind of a little hard to see because of the screen, but there's layers there, right? And so there's something at the bottom that's a control of some sort. There's this circle. There's the stuff in the bottom separate from the stuff in the top. This is actually a side view, and it actually has technical stuff there. System status, background, floating button, content, system navigation. So the first step is let's think about, and some other people have called it, let's think about the z-axis. Let's think about the layering. And then let's think about what we can do with that. So the first thing obviously we can do, it's hard to see here, is you can add little shadows, just light shadows and other things to say this is above this. But there's a whole other sense of it. And it has to do with motion transitions and other effects that you can apply if you do them in the right way. And now what you'll see in our industry is that I could show you good examples and bad examples of every single one of these. I think these ones are pretty good. So here in this first example, this is Yahoo Weather app. And so here's the user sliding the weather up. And as they slid it up, if you noticed, the picture in the background moved a little bit, but it also became blurry. So it stepped back from the interface. So it's one thing to just turn the page and there's your data, right? Flip to the side, there's your data. But they used that technique, they could do more with it. And they could think more about how do we create a sense of the thing, but not worry about being skeuomorphic. So this is not worrying about skeuomorphic, but look at how this transitions. Little information kind of waves in. So you think, oh, there's little cards hanging there. So we didn't lose the relationship to the real world, but we're finding new ways to help continue that relationship.
And I would say that on your phones, this is new. In 1989, I was writing software for HyperCard on a Mac, and we had all these tools, right? So some of this is new, but some of it's actually old, right? But it's with the
new
new
again.
technology, it's actually possible now that we can do it. We can do it on everybody's device, not just on a few set of users, that special users.
This
of the
third
computer.
one is a little bit quick, but as the user brings down the menu, let's see if I can get that. I'll go skip that one, skip that one. So as they bring down the menu, there's a little miniature of what the page that they're selecting is, and then it comes back out. So there was that sense of like what is that thing, and then I bring it back. We've seen these before, right? We've seen like carousels or other selectors. If I press spacebar in Keynote on my Mac, I'll see all the little miniatures of the slides. I can pick one. It's a similar thing, but so we're looking at some new techniques that we can use to think about layers and think about motion. So that's, well, we kind of made some points there. Human factors and devices. So this is a different world, right? We don't sit at a computer. We don't look at a screen, use a mouse and keyboard. So we think about things. And if we think deeply, we'll start to go, oh, you know what? This new gigantic iPhone, which is just way too big, I can't take a picture now. I take lots of pictures. I'm going to take a picture. I got to take two hands, right? And I have to do things. So this is just a drawing that says, okay, where would your hand be able to fit if you were using your left hand? But this is not really how it is. It's actually like this. People hold things differently. People use two hands. They cradle the phone. People use two hands like this or that, and that changes the interface. And when you watch videos of people using your applications and interfaces, they do this without thinking. They actually are just going, do, do, do. They don't actually, I think, maybe the studies are showing that people aren't really aggravated by it. They're definitely getting more of a workout on their hands, but they don't think, God, I'm doing work. I do, but they don't go, I'm getting a workout, all that. So that's interesting. And then, if it's a larger screen, you might be more likely to set it in a stand, attach a keyboard to it. Those are actually used a lot more. 62% are in stands, 24% of keyboards. So people are doing that. 9% I think lean back. So you're holding it, but you're also putting it, you're making it more little permanent. Some of these newer interfaces, Samsung, has the little stylus. So you're not even dealing with the interface. Now you're have a new thing. So we have to think about delivery of information in the context. And we think, okay, so we're going to get to literacy, I guess. Here's how it maybe relates to literacy. Understanding that people do this has a whole set of principles which follow that relate to how do we put things on the screen so people are accurate. People are really accurate in the middle of the screen. They're really bad at the corners. So anything we put at the corners, we know that it's going to have a harder time hitting, and they're more likely to have error. So we want to put things where they can find them, and where they look at, or where your hand isn't on top of the thing that you're trying to look for. We have people's hands integrated, the human factors. We have people connected to those. Storytelling. Everybody's talking about storytelling. We've been talking about storytelling for a long time. I think we've been challenged to be able to actually tell stories because of all the other things we've had to do with the interface and all this page metaphor concept. What is a page? And I have pages, and how many pages do you have in parts of the page, and all that kind of stuff. So here's a little movie. We'll just let it run. And while it's running, I think you'll see the idea of storytelling. Doesn't need any audio, I don't need any words to tell the story. All I'm doing on this website is scrolling downward. I just recorded my screen as I was scrolling downward. Well, I actually chose the color at one point. So as you scroll down the screen, new pieces of content appear and tell different parts of the story of this product. And you probably don't even need to, if this works, you don't need to read the words at all to actually understand what this product is doing. Actually, even how it works, and some of the features of it, social features of it, how it might help you in your life, some charts and things that it does, and what happens, when you're finished with it, what do you do with it? So that told the story. We have the ability to do that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
flatness, a barrier. And they, you know, it takes a while to pull them into the interactivity. And I just was wondering, you know, when I looked at this, again, it's still very linear. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
and kind of stuff. And storytelling is more dynamic. And I was wondering if you come up with some ideas of how to make it more dynamic. And, you know,
Well, this is, yeah, and then you think of an idea.
Yeah.
Yes, it's linear because it's kind of hard to think dynamic. Think of how much more time and effort it would take to make a really compelling thing. However, there are some examples. And so one of the things, the trend sort of to think about is this idea of, and not in the teaching sense, but just in the other sense, of these like single page websites, which is crazy because like for years you had like, let's have pages, let's do all these things. But now people are saying, so when you see this happen most often, it's an item or a product or a service or a tool that really kind of has just the business and service itself is all wrapped up in one thing, and the story is very concise. There'll be more pages on here. I mean, there's gallery, get started, text specs, and all that. But that's what's kind of helping it. I think I would agree with the idea that these devices are personal, and people use them. You've seen more interfaces that they're, or more and more applications where they're trying to say, oh, the screen's bigger, and now two people can sit together. You know, but I think it is very personal. I don't know if I have a reaction to like whether or not I can do anything about that.
Yeah, so for, you know, for me, it's right, the technology has been enabling new kinds of storytelling or new versions of old storytelling. So yes, you can definitely, you can build a system that tells nonlinear stories and you let people navigate it on their own, right, and have different results. Nowadays, I'm starting to learn about this term transmedia, right, which is actually taking the different pieces of media and distributing them across different channels, but then linking them together, so it's not just watching it on YouTube and watching it on TV, right? So there's a lot of businesses that are interested in doing their marketing and telling their story through taking the media, dividing it up into chunks, and then putting it together in different ways for different people. So that seems, you know, that's coming. We got to figure out how to do it. And then again, how do we apply what we know about visual literacy to both? You know, we could apply it to one little snippet like this, one little piece of the story, but then also how to tell the broader story, right? Because there's actually a story space, right? There's stories that connect to other stories. So I think that's what we've got to figure out.
Yeah. Gesture literacy is another kind of area that we think about. It's more at the level of the industry, you know, tech providers, whether they're the operating systems or whether they're kind of integrated with some of their products. But you know, Windows themselves has their set. A lot of these gestures are patented probably 15 years ago, some of them 10 years ago, and we haven't seen them in use yet. And I'll get to the next slide where you see more examples of this problem. So we think about gesture literacy, it's the idea that users have to know how to interact when they're not just typing and mousing and clicking. They have to know that they can do things, right? And you guys know all those things. But there's so many more. And different manufacturers make up different ones, and the other devices don't support it. So you can't take a friend's thing and say, I know how to use that, because it may not have that. You know, when the designers and information architects get creative and they go, oh, let's make a new thing. This one I totally don't understand, because I don't shake anything in real life. I mean, I don't shake something. But there is, you know, you guys are probably familiar, you know, you shake and then it's undo, or shake and, well, I don't know, anything, restart, or whatever you want, which is part of the problem of gesture literacy, is that there are common ones, and then there are very different ones. Some are kind of nice, but they're maybe hard to use. So this is an idea that when you tilt the device, it can scroll down or it can scroll up. You can even watch your eyes because you have a built-in camera, so you can see where you're looking to some extent, and more accurately now. So that's another idea. This is one that Apple did a long time ago. So it's like if I just go like this, right, to the screen, and the screen has a camera, then maybe I'm looking, I'm searching for something, so it could start searching, right, or help me. There's hundreds of those. And I'm kind of happy that we don't use them all the time. But we will. We'll do it when it's not so creepy. Because right now it is kind of creepy to say that the device that has, all the devices have had cameras for so long, but they're not really looking at us, or we don't know they're looking at us, but they will. I mean, there's other gestures, thumbs up for good, you know, throw that away, all these things. This is really just a crazy one, right? I'm not sure exactly, but I think it's like you touch and you maybe pull in some kind of way, and then it's like, hey, I want a 3D object to appear. So maybe that's an interface for some kind of a computer program or more different application. But gesture literacy is a big thing. We have to try, we have a decision to make when we make interfaces. Do we stick with the basic, or do we need something new? Do we need to create a new, thing? There's lots of them out there, but they are causing confusion, and we can't really entirely control it.
And so again, like, what does this mean for visual literacy? And while you were talking, Mike, I did a Google query on the term gesture literacy, and I think we just invented it, right? So this is so new that I don't think anybody else has used that term quite that way before.
And then Ray had like math literacy in the last one, so we have math literacy.
So let's
the
figure it out.
word literacy is very interesting and foreign to me. I mean, I still wrap my head around it. I get it now, but it's taken a while, and now I can apply it to everything, right? I get everything,
Yeah.
Yes? Mm-hmm.
Right, and so now there's real world
different cultures.
body language, right? Thumbs up, thumbs down. So yes, there's a lot of cultural things embedded in gestures, right? Which I'm not sure if the folks designing the technology are aware that a certain gesture that means open could mean, death or something in some cultures, right? And it may make it hard to use. It may make it harder to sell into that market, right?
Yeah, that's definitely an idea.
Good point.
People talk about infographics, information literacy. This is just one sense of it. There's a million senses of it. We could talk for a week on just that. But I think we just want to kind of put some sense of why infographics may be happening, so you're all aware of it as a trend. But it may be because it's a way in which people, if you do it right, that maybe you're more thoughtful about the most important information to convey, and then how do I convey it without words? And we're still obviously doing it, sometimes we're doing it with graphs or just fancier versions of graphs and things like that, and you could go all sorts of ways, good, bad, all that. But I think the idea about information literacy as it extends to infographics, it's a consideration, because when we're thinking about what to put on the screen to convey something, we can think, let's put a photo, let's put some words, or maybe we put a graphic, or we make a chart, but maybe we put some sort of chart like this, or an interactive chart, which people can interact with. And that was the last session, which was fantastic if you guys were in here for visualization, because these are static here in this case, but they don't necessarily have to be. So that's some thoughts around why it might matter, or what you could maybe do. Being literate in it means knowing which things to use when and why, and not just, hey, I'll do what those people did.
And this is a visual literacy conference, but if it was an information literacy conference, would the program be a lot different? Would it? Would it be, which parts would be different, which parts would be the same, right? I think our session would be the same. We could do this we could do this again at an information literacy event. Not a problem.
Everything is literate. Yeah, it's an interesting thing. So, I mean, hopefully this is making you think about not just the things we do very specifically, but again, these should apply to how does, and you've got it, right? How does storytelling, that I'm doing, how does it apply? What's changing? How are professionals using it for their means? There's a lot of, mixed up stuff. And we're not proponents or opposition in any of these ideas. This is just our world. And this is just our world in the last, 2-3 years, that all of this stuff has become something we have to concern ourselves with because it's there. And the last session was completely about that, data visualization. It was fantastic. How many people were in the last one? A couple? Okay, so I think all we wanted to add to that was some thoughts about the democratization of it. And I think so, and there was good, discourse about if you, how do you know what things to use? How do you, know which is the right information for the right purpose? We didn't want to talk about that. What we want to talk about is, can you make things? And if you can make more things, then, well, at least you can practice and fail with them. But if most people can't make things like this, then this beautiful visualization like we saw earlier in that video, which is fantastic, where it showed things over time in motion and movement, so much more meaning was conveyed when you understand it in that way. So this is Edward Tufte, who kind of helped all of us for many years understand the power of making complex data simple to understand and simple to see. He didn't invent the map, this famous map. How many people have seen this map? None of you. I'm going to tell you, there you go. I'm going to tell you what it is, right? It's Napoleon's march on Moscow and Russia, and it's the size, the lighter color is the size of their army when they left. This is a map, and over time, as they got there, and well, actually not over time, over place. But down here, you're seeing actually over time, and you're seeing temperature plotted, and you're seeing the size of their army on the way back, and you might recognized. You know, they went from, I think it was 100,000 something, 100, I don't know, maybe 110,000 to 10,000, you know, or I thought it was like 300. But anyway, because as they got there and as it got cold and as the Russians retreated and as they burned up all of their fields and crops and houses and villages, there was nothing for the, you know, invaders to live on. And so they all just kind of died. But anyway, that was an example of something very old, but very complex. And many people look at it as like a really great example.
Right, and it's actually, right, it's deemed as a piece of art kind of thing made by an expert, right? There was only very few people at the time that were able, that had the skills to create something like that.
So this right here is obviously something really complicated. I don't know, what are we doing? That's that data network diagram and all that kind of stuff. If you spend a little bit of time with this and you care, this is actually, looks complex, is actually not that bad. But there are the democratization aspect of it. It means that can we do things to help people visualize better and take away the time that it takes to take data sets and understand them, such that we have more time to, right, you know, so that we have more time to understand what's going on in the data and not so much time making something. So in the past, again, no one could make these things. Right? And then you had Microsoft Excel, and you can kind of make some things, but nothing like the things we're starting to see that the last session and other, if you haven't been there, just tons of richness to the data and the amounts of data that you can do. So this is just one company who's, you know, launching a product that kind of says, hey, we'll help you kind of make pretty collections, and you can choose what you want, and then you can, you know, you can put them together in your own sort of dashboard, sort of a business sense of it, right? You choose which ones you want to do. Pretty simplistic. But this one, as we think about the business sense of it, this is Tableau software, which has purchase versions, but it also has a free cloud-based version. So when you think as educators, so what's happening is there, you know, this is actually showing like go on the web and get a free data source that's there, you know, available. Like in this case, they're doing like New York graffiti. And so what they're doing here is I'll scroll through, they're opening it up, they're choosing their data source. This is pointing out that the data source contains locations data. Then they're going to the screen where they're going to drag zip code and number of records, and they're going to drag it onto a map. And now they've got a color-coded map by borough and by zip code they can touch and see how much data is there. Then they can create another version of that. So here they're just going to make a graph, and they're going to see over time the different boroughs, and you can see, hey, those guys have not been diminishing. The Bronx, there's a lot more. And then, you know, hey, just a few seconds later, let's pull out those two things we just made. Let's link them together so that people can interact with them. This is not just software, because the next step, the next step is to put that on the web, hosted by the cloud. So what you're seeing on the left are all these different types of examples of data visualizations that you can do with your own data sources and other kinds of data sources you find, mash them together, and then host them in the cloud, embed them in your website for free. Do 8th graders know how to visualize data? Not specifically yet, but can they use this kind of a tool within minutes? That was real time. Actually, it was a 4-minute video, and so I just kind of condensed it. But in 4 minutes in real time, there's no swipes in that video. They're taking the data, downloading the data, import the data, map the data, and they're done. And if you could take something that they could never do before and actually give them the ability to do it, even if they don't know how to do it exactly, even if you guys don't know how to do it exactly and you've got to like figure these things out, but just imagine, I think, a world in which people can think much more deeply about information because the time to create these complex visualizations is minutes and not impossible, right, or weeks. You can spend all that time thinking about it. So I think that when we think about the democratization of data, that's our sense of it and how it could be used in all different kind of contexts. So that's what we're kind of
and again, what does that mean for visualization? What does that mean for educating, right? Are these good tools for educating, or are these tools that get in the way, right? Should you teach them some other things first? Or ideally, right, the visual literacy concepts that you want to teach are already in the tools, and so they're learning the concepts as they're using the tools, right? That would be the best, probably. Yes?
It just makes me wonder, like, are we becoming more visually literate through contact stories, or through a wide open story? Like, is it better to have love on the place?
yeah.
Right. Right.
And does it change the story? Like, I don't, you know, it's just a rhetorical question.
We wanted those, right? See, we're doing this because we're learning. I learned
Right.
a number of things today. It was really great. And it's making me think about some other stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think that's a good question. So what she's talking about is the idea of, just do we tell simpler stories now? Are we all, if now we can tell stories, are we going to just start with really simple ones? Or are we going to still be able to do what others would consider a rich and beautiful and layered story? Is it dumbed down? Is it simplified? It totally is, I think. But in our sense, maybe business sense, maybe communication sense, that's part of our practice. Not to dumb it down. Data is starting to say, let's make it really rich and informative. But in most cases, we're trying to make sure it's accessible to people and that, it's usable by them. And so I think there's that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the challenge is to still know what question you're asking for
Mhm.
people intended.
Mm-hmm.
And as you look at the data, if you can get a fast view of the data representing the answer to that question, you might say, oh, that wasn't the right question. I have this more complicated question. You can keep iterating. I think that's the beauty of tools like that. Is you're
Yeah.
not stuck with the first thing you thought of. You can keep refining your questions to really get down to what you're trying to find out.
Yeah, just to restate that so we could hear. Yeah, the idea that if you can iterate faster, you can throw away data sets that don't make any sense, or mixing and matching cross tabulations that don't make any sense, and find the next one that, oh, look at that, I found the answer in that data that I wouldn't have. And I think that's really mirrored with what we heard in the last session. This is huge, right? We just kind of twist. Anybody else have comments, thoughts about some of these things?
Yes.
One of the probably the most common infographics we have in art museums are timelines.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm thinking about works of art on a timeline, how we all conceive it, and where will that go? Any ideas?
Well, we've been doing some work with Toledo Museum of Art and thinking about that and timeline. If the data's there, if we can get our art together, right, and get it there, just personally, I think, in exploring some of the ideas that done, because there are some other, I think Heilbrunn Timeline of History, I think that's at the Met. Tons and tons of things have been put onto a timeline. Timelines, I think, are incredible for being able to see what happened when. I can't imagine how kids learn in school where in one track, in one thing, they're learning about the history of, civics or some kind of social studies, and then another one they're learning about history of art, and then another one they're learning about history of music. But when you know that like Bach and Mozart were at the same time that this type of art was there, and that these wars were going on, and it wasn't actually that long ago, but in your mind you thought, oh, that was like 1,000,000 years ago, because that's classical. Timelines, I think, help people comprehend the world and the history of our space in the world. So there was a session yesterday that part of it was talking about history and understanding, and I think if you tie that to this, it's huge. It's hugely powerful and engaging, right? Because you suddenly have meaning. You suddenly go, oh, I see that was happening. What else was happening? What else can I put on there to see what's happening, right? What was people's favorite colors? Where did they speak in languages of the world? How much money did people make in those parts of the world where they were doing those things with that art or looking at? It's interesting. So timelines are, big, way, huge, exciting if you have the data.
Yes.
I don't know if you've been to the Toledo Museum of Art, where
Mm-hmm.
they have the giant timelines, and it's user interactive. So they have timelines of really easy to hats throughout time and art, and so it's like a giant wall where the visitors can like one thing, and then
Mm-hmm.
afterwards it shows their visualization of how many people, what was their favorite hat in art.
I think that's a great example, and I think to make it to simpler apply that concept is what they actually did was take 4,000 of their most important pieces of art and reclassify them into human senses of taxonomy, right? If you look at what Brooklyn Museum did, they have had folksonomy tagging for years. They've had people tag all sorts of art. Everybody's tagging. But they didn't do that so much as they said, let's make 25 categories that are more normal to the kind of people, and things like chairs, right, and circles, and hats, and then the art comes together. That's a huge piece of being visually literate in art, especially because they're teaching you that, hey, look at look at this detail, right? Look at this texture, look at this color, and then here's other art that did that, right, and it introduced you to it. So I think that's a good example. And if you haven't seen it, I'm sure you can see Cleveland's wall. There's videos of it all over the place, or go to Cleveland, right? It's like this wall, but 15 foot tall, or 6. I think it's only 6, 8 foot long, but 40 foot long, and it's.
By local projects.
What's that? Yes.
The designers were a company called Local Projects.
Yeah, local projects worked on some of that and some other.
Do its digital
Yeah, yeah. So they're sort of having a niche. So some companies are having a niche in like how do we present and how do we continue to present. But that's a good one. Any other thoughts? Oh, one back.
One of the things that a couple of, at least maybe I was sleeping, is that a lot of people don't think about old people, and all you sweet young things are going to get old someday.
Yep.
And so, my kids want me to get a fancier phone, but trust me, it's a lot better to slide out and your nails can put
Sure.
than it is with your little finger, and especially when people start getting arthritis, they can't.
Sure.
The accept, the ignore, you gotta slide that sucker. If you could just
Yeah.
tap it, it might work a lot better.
Yeah.
Voting machines, the other day, I'm in there, it won't slide no matter what. I finally have to ask her help. She says, I can't come in there while you're voting. I said, well, I can't come out till I vote. What am I gonna do?
Yeah.
Somebody comes in and guess
Sure.
what? Oh, the slider isn't working. Well, I wanna go, no, blank, Sherlock.
Yeah.
But, it's,
Sure.
oh, okay, we gotta start you over and that, void your voting.
So.
Sometimes we don't think about these things, but for older people, accessibility is going to be a problem.
Yeah, it
There's a
definitely
whole
is.
crew coming along between 50 and 65.
Yep.
Boom,
Yeah.
it's a big change.
When you look at, if you were to compare and contrast Apple's accessibility guidelines on their iPhone devices and tablets versus what Android has, Apple has gone so much further to help accommodate all sorts of people with text sizes or color or mono sound and all these other things. But it is absolutely a concern. And again, if you think about your audience first and who is my audience, who's going to use this thing, and if it becomes anyone and everyone, then you would think more about that.
Right.
But it's
Right. And
absolutely what you're
Yeah.
saying. Accessibility is one of our core ideas. Does it play out for people with limited mobility or limited ability to see? Not as much as we'd like it to.
Right, and usually the business case is, right, a lot of companies are forced to, in the United States, to adhere to certain accessibility guidelines, right? And what they find is if they go through and they carefully design the technology to handle for blind or deaf people or older people with poor vision, then it works for lots of other users too, right? So then it works for people perhaps, right? So again, if your eyes are getting old and things are blurry, then that also, solutions for that helps with people that can't read very well already, right? So usually there's a business case behind it, but yeah, one of many topics that we didn't cover. There's lots more to do. So, anything else that you guys are interested in that you want to mention? Because I think we've got like 2 minutes left.
Yeah.
And we put the least important slides at the end, so it doesn't really matter.
Well, there are some, but we've made the case a number of times, which is good. But that's kind of just thinking about breadth and depth of things. I mean, being literate means having an understanding of what's there and sort of hopefully piquing your interest in trying to understand more or think of its relationship to other things. Certainly not being fluent. Fluent takes a long time, and it also involves being able to see a lot of new things and go, those aren't going to happen, right? And that thing is like, oh, that's going to be neat. Let's use that. That is really hard. But just understanding some of the things that people go through in using the devices that all of us in our lives cannot avoid having, right, or using, it's complex, but there's certainly some principles that apply, and hopefully you've seen some of those applications.
So thank you very much. So this was